Be brave were the last words that my grandfather said to my mother. In times of difficulty and loss, what's important is the ability to bounce back, to learn the reasons why we lost and come back stronger.
It's come to really symbolize the story of many, many people. And so it's our duty and responsibility to make sure they are able to move forward in life. No? We're continuing the original mission of my grandfather.
Once in a while, there comes a man who, brief though his years, leaves a legacy. Such a man was my father, and his monument is the Far Eastern University.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the FEU Alumni Speakers Bureau webinar series. This is Eric John Visda from the Alumni Relations Office, and I will be your host for today's webinar session. Today, in the fourth installment of our webinar series, our topic of discussion is really interesting as our topic was formed into separate topics as well. What do I mean by this? See, we always talk about number one, the government, on how they govern and serve the Filipino people. Second, budget, always the discussion of literally by everyone, not only in the country but around the world. And lastly, of course, currently our war with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is deeply affecting everyone around the globe. Now, combining these three separate topics, we go to this question and will serve as our main discussion for this afternoon. Where does the COVID-19 budget go? And this question will be finally answered today. I know you are all excited for today, so let's start. Now, may I call on the section head of the Alumni Relations Office, Mr. Edwin V. Maclang, to introduce to you our speaker.
Good afternoon. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, my fellow alumni and our guests. And ending this webinar session, I have the honor of introducing our three alumni who will be serving as our resource speaker for this afternoon's session. Let me start with our first speaker. Our first speaker has already served numerous government service agencies. First, he was with the national budget from 2014 to 2017. He also worked in the Department of Finance from 2012 to 2016. And in that year, he helped Secretary Purisima, Secretary Dominguez, and then DOF Undersecretary, and now NEDA Secretary Chua in the DOF leadership transition process. Currently, he served as the policy researcher at the Ateneo de Manila University, where his focus are on custom reform, international trade, and economic policy. He is also part of the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies in the same institution. Now, he is a coordinator of the hashtag COVID-19 PH Citizens Budget Tracker team. Without further ado, let us welcome Mr. Kenneth Isaiah Ibasco Abante. Our second speaker, may I introduce will also introduce now, serve as the Chief of Staff for Jonathan Swanson and Catherine Krag. She is Senior Manager for People's Operations at TamTank, an online marketplace for services. She was Managing Consultant for Advisor Services Division at PNA Grant Thornton, working with local and international companies in banking, financial services, information technology, manufacturing, business process outsourcing, international aid, nonprofit energy, and club membership. She is also part of the hashtag COVID-19 PH Citizens Budget Tracker as one of the member of the Financial Reporting Group. Let us welcome Ms. Janly Ann Burao. Hi, Janly. And our third, and certainly not least, is an audit manager in the audit and assurance practice of Navarro Amper and Company, the Philippine practice of Deloitte Southeast Asian Limited. He has significant experience in managing audit and other engagement for multinational companies, including assisting clients in the implementation of new accounting guidelines. Currently, he is the branch head of Deloitte Cebu office. In their group, the hashtag COVID-19 PH Citizens Budget Tracker team, he is financial reporting and local budget track head. Besides his work and volunteer experience, this speaker is a graduate of the Institute of Accounts, Business and Finance, Batch 2013. In addition, he is a recipient of the Dr. Nicanor Reyes Senior Award and one of the 10 outstanding students of the Philippines in 2013. It is an honor to introduce to everyone a loud and proud FEU alumni. Let's welcome Mr. John Michael Lava. So all our three speakers, Isaiah, John Leal, and John, and all the other brave alumni who are watching us in this webinar, welcome and good afternoon.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat. Ako po si Ken. Maraming salamat po sa napaka-generous introduction. Isa pong karangalan ang mapunta ngayon sa FEU to discuss po yung findings ng aming 60+ volunteers sa Citizens Budget Tracker. Ipapadala po namin yung slides na ito sa inyo mamaya. Pero hindi lang po kami nasa Google Sheets. Meron na rin po kami social media presence at nandito po yung links ng aming work. So, ang i-discuss po namin ay yung kwento po ng kung paano nabuo ang Citizens Budget Tracker at magbibigay din po kami ng high-level breakdown po nung budget. And then mamaya po sa question and answer ay pwede pong yung gagawin po natin ay pwede po tayo mag-drill down dun sa mga high-level items na yun. Pero, so we wanted to share the story of the Citizens Budget Tracker using Filipino song. Yung tawag po sa kanta ay Magtanim ay di biro. And the reason for this metaphor is because the way that we describe the budget is it's kind of like watering a garden and planting seeds. So we have 3 parts, each corresponding to each of our speakers today. Yung first is pagtatanim ng binhi, planting a seed, pagdidilig ng hardin, which is watering the garden, and some reflections about about watering this garden over the past more than 3 months that we've monitored the budget. So ito yung lupa or the ground. The Citizens Budget Tracker started with a series of Facebook messages and perhaps a recognition of a need to try to figure out where the budget goes. So nagsimula po siya dahil meron po akong cousin at aunt na wala pong PPE, na frontliner po dito sa Bicol. So Bicolano po ako. And we were talking to them and we were saying basically it's not enough for private individuals to keep on donating. For us to have a sustainable response to the crisis, we need sustainable government support and public funds. And while it was great that they were able to get their PPEs through private donations, we thought it would be good to ask the question, what is the plan, right? And we asked generally sa Facebook if anyone was making a tracker on the Philippine government budget allocation and spending on COVID-19. And many of my friends basically said no one is doing that, so sige, gawin natin. So the next slide was also a recognition that many of our people might not be getting emergency subsidies. So yung ayuda po or yung social amelioration program, because during that time, we were researching on this, what we call the scandal of invisibility, where we discovered that around 5 to 7.5 million Filipinos, our poorest brothers and sisters, do not have access to a birth certificate. And because they don't have access to a birth certificate, they likely won't have access to an ID, which government can then use to distribute whatever emergency subsidies there were. And meron po kaming mga partner communities dito where they basically said, for us, COVID-19 is a threat, but what is even more of a threat is hunger. So nakita po namin yan sa mga early days nung paggawa namin ng tracker. And of course, the perspective has to be what set of policies are inclusive so that people who really need the budget, people who really need the assistance, get the assistance. So yun po yung nakita namin na context. Yun po yung lupa na kung saan kami nakatayo 3.5 months ago. And if you go to the next slide, ito po yung mga kasangkapan. We started asking people, basically asking for help. We started tagging people, and this is one of the first areas where we asked for help, and this is where Jalil and Michael came in, just basically asking questions. Hey, can someone help me code part of the site? Can someone help me make this data more open to the public in machine readable format that scholars and researchers like us can analyze the data. So when we published it in version 0, it started siguro with a sense of anger and frustration, the journey of the budget tracker. But what I realized after publishing this version 0 was that so many people wanted to volunteer. And in fact, one of the lessons that I learned in early on when we were starting and organizing this initiative was that wala pong shortage of goodness and kindness and volunteerism po sa Pilipinas. Naniniwala po ako, and this has been my experience, that so many people want to help. They just need to be given the space to help. And the people who are organizing, the people who are leading, must be humble enough to ask for help. So if you go to the next slide, nandito na po yung sa April 4, dito nagsimulang mag-yes dun sa call for help and call for citizenship si Jalil. And sabi niya lang sa request, auditing or double-checking help needed for the Citizens Budget Tracker. Because every week, the President would send up reports for the public. And then what we did for early on in the Budget Tracker, which we still do up to now, is to update the tracker weekly, given the President's report, in a format that can be analyzed and mined by scholars and researchers. And then si Jalil said yes, and then we messaged, and then Jalil recruited our star financial reporting recruit, si Michael, na napakagaling sa audit and accounting. And dyan po nagsimula yung aming small team that has been doing this since April. Marami pa pong iba. So marami po kaming types of volunteers dito. There are 60 plus of us. And there are people from data science, there are people from the legal profession, there are people who were former government workers, and current government workers, in fact, from social welfare, from budget, from the finance department. We have auditors and accountants, of course, which goes to show that for as long as we, again, ask for help and are humble enough to ask for help, people will come and help. Yun po, part din po ng team namin ay napakagagaling na graphic designers and web developers who were able to siguro make our metaphor come to life. Na yung metaphor po namin na we wrote a paper about ay yung pagdidilig ng Hardin. And we wanted to make sure that there's accountability, to make sure our funds are present to address COVID-19 and they're spent properly and promptly. If you go to the next slide, ang budget po, naniniwala kami, ay kwento ng pagdidilig ng Hardin, where our garden is our programs or the beneficiaries. The major goal is to make sure that our garden and the soil in our garden is continuously wet, so our plants and our flowers bloom and grow as all flowers should. Yun po yung programs. And then the way that we run our metaphor is meron pong tubig or sources of water na yun po yung tawag namin ay cash o pera. And the question we must ask is may tubig pa ba sa poso? To which our answer is yes. The second is timba. So each budget line item is in fact a bucket. And the size of the bucket is determined by a group of carpenters. So they're a congress of carpenters, in fact, decide on the size of this budget. Yung tawag po sa amin at yung tawag po sa Congress ay appropriation. So ano ba yung tamang appropriation or budget para dito sa programang ito? And the act of spending the money or watering the garden is what we call a disbursement. So if you go to the next portion of this animation, yan parang meron tayong watering can or yung bucket na idinidilig sa mga halaman. And the key distinction that we want to raise is that your water or yung cash po at yung pera ay iba po sa budget. So in fact, most of the confusion in public communications related to the budget is due to this confusion. No, we should not confuse the water that we have or our cash sources with the size of the budget. At iba rin po yung actual na nadilig na tubig sa hardin, which is our spending, with the actual size of the budget. No? So, ang key po sa messaging namin ay meron pong pera, in fact 2 trillion yun, marami po yun, both for regular and COVID spending. And then the budget is around 390 billion. And we've spent around 2/3 of this budget. So kapag sinasabi po ng government officials so hindi po totoong walang pera yung Pilipinas dahil meron po tayong pera, in fact marami. The key po is how fast are we spending that money. So yun po yung budget ay kwento ng pagdidilig na. So ito po yung mga hardinero at kapitbahay. Yun po yung mga mukha nila. Napaka-diverse din po naming team. And we're very thankful for all their leadership. Just to reiterate po na ito po yung community effort. So iba-iba po yung aming fields, pero we are coming together and organizing to make sure that the public understands where the budget is spent.
Maraming salamat, Ken. So ngayon siguro nagtatanong kayo kung paano namin ginagawa yung pagbabudget. But before that siguro it's good to be back in FEU. So, namiss ko ang Tamaraw community. So, pagpasensyaan nyo ang mga ingay ng manok at aso dito sa amin. At ako ay nasa farm. talagang napaka-appropriate ng topic na magtanim ay bibiro. So, ngayon nandito tayo sa maghapong na kayo po. Kung paano namin ginagawa ang pagbabudget every week, ang pagtatrack ng budget every week. So sinabi ni Ken, ang budget ay kwento ng pagdidilig ng Hardin. So I just want to reiterate na yung source natin ay yung cash or pera. Yung bucket, yun yung nagsisilbi yung budget. At yung Hardin natin, yun yung nagsisilbi yung mga programa at mga beneficiaries. So ang basihan ng aming report, yung tinatrack namin, next slide please. Ayan. Ang basehan ng aming report ay mismong President's Report na sinusupite sa Joint Congressional Oversight Committee. So, dun lang gagaling yung track namin na budget. Hihimay namin ang laman nito kada Lunes kasi yun yung dun laging lumalabas yung report para matrack kung magkano nang nagasto sa bawat programa. Namin itong kino-cross-check ang Financial Reporting Team kung saan ako at si Ate Jalil ay parte. Namin itong kino-cross-check sa mga reports sa bawat ahensyang namamahala sa programa. Kung bangga ba ang nire-report, kung tama ba ang nire-report, at kung gaano na kalaki ang nire-report. At ginagamit namin ang mga datos mula sa mga press releases din ng mga ahensya. Pagkatapos namin na ma-analyze, ma-input lahat ng mga data galing sa President's Report at sa mga reports galing sa ahensya, we analyze and report. We ask questions about the data and generate our weekly report. And we send our data to executive agencies and even to the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee. Siguro gusto ko lang din namin na ipaalam sa inyo ano bang mga limitasyon ng ginagawa namin. Una, We just rely on the government reports dun sa spending and outputs data na nasa President's report. We cannot actually confirm yung actual outputs na binibigay doon kasi hindi naman namin pwedeng mapuntahan, lalo na ngayon ay most of us ay naka GCQ o naka ECQ. And we see our role as aggregator or taga-suma lang ng mga informasyon na nakukuha namin. And we also do not understand the way the health budget is spent. I think nagkakasimula pa lang na maglabas ng mga datos mula sa Department of Health regarding sa kung paano ginagastos yung DOH budget. And we also do not track health outcomes, so we leave this work to the epidemiologists, and we focus our efforts on tracking the outputs that enable these health outcomes. Malinaw na malinaw po sa sinasabi namin na sapat po ang ating pera. So there's a 2 trillion announced net cash sources for COVID and regular spending. May 2.2 trillion confirmed in treasury, may 405 billion na confirmed but not yet in treasury, and meron pong 222 billion na hindi tayo sure. So less 784 in full year government debt payments. At dun sa pangalawang tanong, na ano ba talaga yung size ng budget natin, at lagi namin sinasabi na move on na tayo sa 275 billion. Ang tunay at ang laki ng ating COVID-19 budget under the Bayanihan Act is 385 billion. 272 billion coming from social amelioration, 76 billion ang minamanage ng health, ng Department of Health, at 37 billion ang napupunta naman sa Bayanihan grant to local government units. Tapos, sa pangatlong tanong na aming sinagot, so ang tanong ay, are we spending fast enough? So ang sagot po namin ay hindi. Sa huling tala namin noong last week, noong June 29, 14 weeks na po tayong nasa ECQ, pero 240 billion out of 350 billion lang ang nagastos natin o 68%. So, dapat po siguro na ma-point out din natin dito na kaka-release lang ng second tranche ng social amelioration program noong June. So, most of the 186 billion na spent budget ay coming from the first tranche. Pero yung second tranche ay kakasimula pa lang na dapat ay nagsimula po noong May pa. Sa health naman, 54 billion po ang natatrack ng team namin out of the 82 billion. So yung 76 billion yun po yung Bayanihan budget at 6 billion naman yung other DOH managed funds. So only 66% yung spent. However, sa parte po ng health, kailangan natin ng mas maraming data para talagang matrack ng tama itong parte na ito. So, ang sinasabi namin, ang isyong ito ay mahalagang abangan natin lahat. Maiging malaman natin kung sapat ba talaga ang tubig na pandilig. Marami po ang nangangamba ngayon kung may pera ba tayo. Alam ko na marami kayong tanong about them. At kung may natatanggap pa bang ayuda yung mga pamilyang apektado. At kailangan nating malaman din kung gaano kalaki talaga ang timba. Sinasabi namin, ng tunay na size ng budget ay 385 billion. At syempre, pinakamahalagang malaman natin kung gaano ba kabilis na nadidiligan ang mga halaman sa Hardin. Maraming sa ating mga kapatid ngayon na hindi pa nararating ng tulong. So yung second tranche, hindi pa fully nabibigay yun. And we need to spend faster to stop hunger, sinasabi natin. At sa usaping health naman, hindi pa rin natin nararating ang testing targets. Ilang buwan na inaabot natin ang testing targets, pero hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin natin siya maabot-abot. Kaya sinasabi namin na spend faster to stop hunger and test, trace, and treat. Malaking bagay po na malaman kung ano na ang estado ng pagdidilig natin para mahimok at matulungan ang ating gobyerno sa pagpapaigi ng pagbuhos ng tulong. Now I turn you over to Ate Yen for the next part of this topic.
Maraming salamat po, Michael and Ken. So andito tayo sa portion ng kanta. Hindi ko alam kung lahat sa atin ay familiar, pero kakatapos lang nating mag-discuss si Ken, no? Nagkwento ng Hardin kung saan kami nagdidilig. Si Michael naman nagkwento ng maghapong pagyuko ng aming team para maipresenta yung datos na nakalap namin. Ngayon, sa section ko naman, gusto kong i-share kung sino yung mga kaliyag namin, halina-halina mga kaliyag, and maybe share to you some insights that we've learned as we've partnered with different groups and with government agencies and including the media. So, gaya ng sinabi ni Ken, parang hindi sapat na yung impormasyon na to ay tumigil lang sa amin. Kailangan humingi din ng tulong, hindi lang sa gawa ng pagdidilig or pag-garden, but also to share the insights that we have. And really the goal is to educate the public. And of course, the first people that we've worked with are really people from government, both national and local. Kasi sila naman po talaga yung unang-una, sa kanila po nanggagaling yung datos. So maraming salamat sa mga partners namin in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, Department of Finance, DSWD, Department of Health, and National Privacy Commission. And now we're also working with LGUs, Gumaca, the municipality of Gumaca, Calabanga, and not shown here, but we're also working with the province of Benguet. And we're sharing this with you, especially because I think that it for any civic movement to be sustainable, it really has to be with government. It's very important because only government has, first of all, the data that we need to get all of this information, but government has the scope and the scale to deliver the services needed. So kung meron mang makakapag-execute at makakapag-make ng changes na kailangan nating gawin, government po yun. And our role as civil society members is to really give them feedback and share with them what we see are the overlooked aspects of our response to COVID-19 so that they can address it. And we found that they listen, maybe not all, but at least the opportunity to be heard is very valuable to us, and we really, it's precious to our team pag napapakinggan po kami. Magandang signal yon that that our hard work is also being recognized, and in fact some of our suggestions are included in the second draft of the Bayanihan Act, the revised one that's more geared towards recovery, especially yung reporting standards. And we're saying this because we're finding in this crisis really that the strength of our institutions can spell literally life or death for our people, and we also see that right now that the truth is our institutions are not strong enough to respond to the largest humanitarian crisis that we are facing in the country and even globally. And so now is really not the time to, while of course we see all of these constraints, it's also now is the best time to really partner with government and see how we can help. And hopefully that we will be met with openness and a willingness to partner with groups such as us that can help in certain aspects where we could. So dun po yung naging role ng government, and we're very thankful to the people who've reached out to us to also proactively, and to the members of our team who are who are working with these government agencies to push forward for data requests and to also give us the information that we need. The next group that we've worked with are civil society organizations, and so we're working with Right to Know Right Now, COVID Action Network Philippines, Movement for Good Governance. We're working with the Makati Business Club, Move as One Coalition, Syntax Coalition, and Action for Economic Reforms. And this is really important for us to work with these groups because our duty as citizens do not end when we vote. And we cannot sit on our democracy. We have to join movements where we can, and also support movements that are really making an effort to provide feedback to government and to present areas na nakakaligtaan. And that's the role of these civil society organizations, and even our role as friendly neighborhood gardeners. So we've seen that there is power when civil society band together and work together and amplify their voices to present to government some of the areas that really need to be paid attention to, with mixed success. But nonetheless, it's an important exercise for us to really participate in. And it is a privilege, but not all governments provide this opportunity, or not all states provide this opportunity for us to express and share the feedback that we are sharing as a team. And so I think for us, while our government is not perfect and our democracy is not perfect, we're still privileged that we're even given the space to do this, all the more so now. And I think we should really take that to heart and take seriously our duty as citizens to present to move together and to join with other organizations that are pushing for better governance and transparency. So kung kaya po natin, at if that speaks to you as well. The last I guess partners and very important for us, and we're so grateful that they saw our work and thought it worthwhile to share what we found. So I think for some of us, we know that the media is the fourth estate. No, its duty, really, when done well, is to educate and present the truth to the public and to share the facts of our current situation. And so far, we've partnered with all of these media organizations to present our work. And it has been helpful in a way. A measure of our success is yung hindi na masyado napapag-usapan yung 275 billion. Siguro kung yung mga kaibigan ko na hindi ko nakakausap, mga elementary classmate ko, nagme-message sa akin tungkol sa budget, yun yung mga success indicators namin. Wala pa naman kaming mga media reach analysis, pero so far, I think that our findings are also reaching these people, and our deep analysis of what's going on in the budget is hopefully really helping people have facts. No, I guess what we're seeing is there's a lot of information going on, and there are a lot of emotions that are attached to how we're responding to this crisis. And as much as we can, we want to emotionally respond to the truth and to actual facts, and not just speculation. And I think that's the work of the media, to present us with these facts that we can really parse through and study and help educate ourselves. Media also has the capacity to reach the farthest, especially yung radyo, napaka-powerful ng radyo. So we're grateful for opportunities to do that. And while there is some fear right now in terms of our freedom of speech, and of course with the closure of the biggest media organizations in the country, with ABS-CBN being closed, that obviously has brought a lot of tension. But nonetheless, it's important that we also recognize the role of the media to bring these stories to life. And I think lastly, one of the powerful things that working with journalists does is they're the ones who can really bring the human dimension and the human story to the numbers that we present. Gaya po ng sinabi ni Michael, hindi naman po kami nakakapunta doon sa mga individuals, no, tsaka nakaka-interview because of the quarantine. So we're not really able to go down there and validate in person and talk to these people. And the media or journalists really have the opportunity to go deep. Kami top-line figures ang nire-report namin, but journalists have the reach and also the connections to really look at the human dimension of what is going on and present the underlying human condition dito sa mga top-line figures na nire-report natin. And we're finding, gaya nga na sinabi ni Ken nung una, na yes, there's progress, yes, we're spending, pero may mga nakakaligtaan pa rin at kailangan aksyonan yon at tulungan po sila. And so this is where journalists help surface these human stories, so that we're not forgetting that amidst all of these statistics, COVID-19 has impacted lives, no, and it's very real, and it's affecting us, not just us, but our brothers and sisters who are vulnerable. And so these are some of the lessons that we've learned in partnering with government, with civil society, and with journalists. So what are opportunities? I know some of you are asking how can we help. So may mga oportunidad din po to help us. So Michael is leading this effort. Our dream is to have 20 local government unit budget trackers. And right now we're working with Gumaca, Quezon, Calabanga, Camarines Sur, and the Benguet province. We're also going to present Ken is working on this, an LGU health financing model. As you know, hindi kaya ng resources ng local government health units to respond to this crisis. And I think it's about time that we really strengthen them anyway. And we're going to come up with a financing model to help LGUs do that. We're also looking for open data partnerships. If you look at our tracker, there are data requests there. And it would be, if you have connections and know anyone who can point us to the right data sources, that would be helpful, especially sa health spending. Of course, media and education. So you can use our site for information sessions. You can use our data in classroom instruction for finance, accounting, analytics, and have your students play around with our data, make their own analyses and conclusions, and use our data as source materials for student journalists. Some schools have mobilized their student journalists to write stories using the data that we present. So these are just some of the opportunities that we have for you in terms of partnering with us. So there. Now we are going to share with you reflection mode, magsipag-unat-unat muna, and share with you our reflections na Pagninilay sa Hardin. And I now give the time to Ken to share our first reflection point.
Yeah, so the first is, again, as Ate Yen said and as Michael said, it's very important for government and citizens to partner, even in a climate of fear, of terror, of the stifling of dissent. It's very important to continue to keep asserting our right to information and asserting our rights under the Constitution to continue to become citizens of this land. And part of that, yun nga the exercise of our democracy does not stop with our vote. It's very important for us to keep asking questions because it's our hard-earned taxpayer money that is being spent here. And we have every right to know where every cent that we contribute to government, we have every right to know where that goes. So yun in the social contract, napakahalaga ng partnership na yan between governments and citizens. At the same time, yung second reflection ay mahalaga for us to strengthen our institutions and the role of volunteerism. I personally saw myself at the start of COVID, quite confused, honestly, and very anxious. And nung nag-start po yung lockdown at nag-start yung ECQ, I think there was a week or two where I really could not work because suddenly it felt like everything I was working on suddenly became deprioritized. Hindi na po siya yung mahalaga. At nakita ko po na na napakahalaga ng volunteerism, especially for COVID-19 related efforts. I found na kinailangan kong mag-reprioritize. Meaning, I think 60% of my time now is with volunteer efforts. And my mom sometimes keeps asking me, Ken, ano ba yung ginagawa mo ngayon? Pro bono ba yan or may bayad ba yan? Pero I think mahalaga for me na ang yung lagi kong response sa nanay ko at sa mga tao nagtatanong na parang bakit ganyan karami yung binibigyan mong oras for volunteerism ay honestly, if we don't try to volunteer now and really try to work on these important issues now, what type of economy, what type of life will we experience post-COVID? So mahalaga to continue to strengthen our institutions and know, in fact, that it is not the role of one individual to do this, but the role of a community. We have a prayer in the Citizens Budget Tracker na Panginoon, bigyan mo kami ng biyaya na naisin ang puna. Grant me the grace to desire critique. And this is our research prayer. And it's a prayer that I think does not just extend to research, but also to the public service and public servants. So ano pa yung aming mga pagninilay dito? Mahalaga yung kabataan sa youth movements. Mahalaga yung na we continue to be engaged because we are going to inherit these institutions, and in fact we already are experiencing the consequences of institutions that are not yet as strong as they should be, although that has to be balanced with siguro empathy with our frontliners and the people who are really exposed to this virus. So yun yung balance we demand change and we demand accountability and transparency. At the same time, we do not forget that the people who are bearing the brunt of the crisis are people as well who have their families, our barangay health workers, our people in the front lines. So yun po yung hugot namin. At may mga kapamilya po kami dito sa Citizens Budget Tracker na nasa government din po. At nakikita po namin yung mga sakripisyo nila. At naniniwala kami na kailangan suportahan yung mga taong gumagawa talaga ng trabaho. So critique is important, but also the empathy with the people who serve and are exposed. So yun po yung part ko sa pagninilay. Baka may gustong idagdag si Ate Yen at si Michael.
Siguro ako, for me, siguro sa profession din, I believe it's really critically important for us to push for basic transparency and accountability in our government spending during the pandemic. And this is the reason why I actually joined the Citizens Budget Tracker team. For me, budget tracking plays an important role of monitoring health outcomes and government spending, to track budget spending, and to provide feedback sa government. The CBT plays a crucial role both as supporting actors in budget tracking or in a monitoring, accountability, and information sharing function. Hindi po kakayaning malampasin ang thesis na ito kung magsasarili po tayo, at naniniwala kami na hindi kami nandito para mamuna sa gobyerno, kundi tulungan sila na mas maipakita kung nasa na ba tayo sa spending natin, nasa na ba tayo sa mini-monitor natin ng mga programa. Ate Yen?
Thank you for that. I think in general, ito naman din talaga yung pagninilay natin. But also, I guess as the work has evolved, I'm also seeing that this is now a season for self-reflection, no, as individuals, as Filipinos, and an existential time for us to reflect as a society what kind of government we want to have, what kind of democracy we want to have. And first step in doing that is really a self-awareness as a society, kung ano ba talaga yung what is really going on, and to have an enlightened sense of our existing situation. So for any significant change to happen, there has to be a recognition of what is your current state. And so we are now seeing more than ever the cracks in our institutions and the current state that we are in and what needs to change. And we really we're going to inherit these. If we're not going to make any changes, magpapatuloy lang to. And siguro mahalaga ding malaman natin yung cultural context natin, na I think a lot of us are very hesitant to provide critique and to even receive critique because we are socialized sa bahay na kapag anak ka, hindi ka dapat nagrereklamo sa magulang mo. So para naka-carry over natin siya na ang gobyerno ang magulang, tayong mga citizens ay mga anak, at pag nagrereklamo tayo, parang disrespectful. So that's also something that we're hardwired and kind of socialized to. And kind of, that's how we are socialized, and we have to consciously get over that. I suppose na feedback is good, feedback is helpful, and we have to aspire to receive it, but also to give it with empathy and respect, as Ken has said. And I think this is only when we are going to take an honest and hard look at ourselves and who we are as a people and who we are as a society, and provide that feedback and constant dialogue to each other without being defensive or overly sensitive, but also being respectful when we do it. Tsaka lang talaga magkakaroon ng siguro maayos na way forward. And that is also what we're trying to do, to present a different model. I think in the 80s, 90s, our concept of activism is going out in the streets. And I'm from UP, so very close sa tradisyon ko yung pag-aaklas sa streets. And that is how we used to protest and give feedback to government. That was the model of how to do it. But now there are different ways. And the Citizens Budget Tracker is also a way to provide feedback and critique. And now with social media, with how the youth is finding different avenues to provide feedback to their government, to the government officials, we are seeing these different models of communication and modes of communication to the government. At hindi lang po pag-aaklas sa mga streets ang way. There are also different ways to do it, and we have to aspire to strengthen these avenues for feedback and conversation. Dahil yun, self-awareness is key. And only when we know what the current state is, tsaka lang tayo makakapag move forward and properly address the problems that we're facing. So that's what I'm also seeing. And let's be comfortable. I know inherently as Filipinos, we're not comfortable with feedback, we're not comfortable with critique, but that's how we grow. And I think that's important, an important muscle for us to build as individuals, but also as a society. So there. So on that note, magpanibago tayo ng lakas. That's how the song goes para sa araw ng bukas. I think this is going to be a long journey ahead. It's not going to end in the next few months. It will take a while before we really recover. So we have to pace ourselves, strengthen ourselves, and really prepare to see the change that we want to happen after COVID-19. So, any final thoughts, Ken and Michael?
I think that summarizes a lot of the reflections. Michael, kung may gusto kang i-add?
Okay na rin. So we can proceed to the
Q&A.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po.
Yeah, we'll share our slides, and these are the links if you're interested to know more about us. Salamat.
Yes, thank you so much to all our speakers for this afternoon. So, hello again, this is Eric. So, we shall now proceed in the question and answer portion of the program. So, now the questions that I will be asking are the questions given by you, our dear participants. But we still encourage you to ask questions, so please type them in the chat box located at the right side of your screen, and I will try to ask them to the speakers. So I guess our speakers are ready for your questions. So here it goes. So my first question, so anyone could answer, ma'am and sirs. What are the direct and indirect effects of not being able to utilize all of the funds and not giving the public a full transparency? Anyone could answer, ma'am, sirs?
I can take first crack, tapos si Jalil and Michael can add.
Alright.
So para po sa akin, yung kapag hindi ka po transparent sa kung paano ginagastos yung pera, for me, it's a violation of the social contract between the government and its citizens. Parang very, very basic po para sa atin, the constitutional right to information, so that all of us can figure out how to help better. So nandun naman po yun parang kapag if citizens are continued to be kept in the dark, it's going to be very hard for us to manage this crisis. And not only because, di ba, halimbawa, kailangan ng ayuda ng mga tao kasi emergency subsidy, di ba? At emergency siya, gutom yung magiging consequence para sa social amelioration program. Para sa health naman, it's the inability to flatten the curve. And if we are not able to flatten the curve, we will continue to be in this situation na parang magbubukas yung ibang parts ng economy, gagawing mas relaxed yung quarantine rules, pero kung wala kang enough information about health, and we're glad that the Department of Health is taking great strides in publishing daily kung ano yung data sets natin. Of course, may parang it's not a perfect system, but it's there. It's part of the birth pains of putting a culture of data and research into an organization. Pero for the budget system, for example, in the health system, parang ngayon po aggregates lang yung nakikita natin. Kaya hindi rin po namin alam kung ano yung magiging best way for us to engage volunteers, for example. So in that sector of the budget tracker work. Para naman po kaya po yung ginagawa namin ngayon, 'di ba? Meron po kaming mga binigay na big numbers, 'di ba? Merong 2 trillion, merong 385 billion, or ngayon 390 billion, depending on what type of depending on the date. Tapos merong parang 2/3 of that is spent. Pero for us to be able to know whether the money has been spent, kailangan tingnan yung pinaka-detalyadong data. So yung ginagawa namin ngayon for social amelioration, chine-check namin yung mga pangalan talaga. And so far, 2 to 3 million pa lang po yung na-publish na pangalan. So hindi pa namin alam kung talagang napunta sa mga dapat puntahan yung pera for social amelioration. We're continuing to lobby for that information. Para naman po sa mga kontrata, may mga data po, and si Michael yung gumawa ng aming audit procedures dito. Meron po kaming data set ngayon from the Government Procurement Policy Board data worth 6 billion pesos. So that's around $120 million. So dito po sa 6 billion pesos, 4 billion po nito yung na-analyze na namin at tinatry namin i-test run. Pero imbis na yung current na available na data po kasi sa Procurement Policy Board ay nasa level lang siya ng kontrata. So yung sum po ng kontrata yung nakalagay, hindi pa yung actual item. So yung ginagawa po namin ngayon, talagang maghapong nakayo ko sa aming mga procurement analysts para i-check ano ba talaga yung bawat isang item. Halimbawa, merong kontrata na 80 yung items na medical items. Hindi mo pwedeng compare yung kontrata na ito na PPE sa isa pang kontrata kasi hindi mo yan mako-compare. Baka yung isa PPE na mask lang, yung isa set. 'Di ba? So hindi mo naman talaga mako-compare yung mga presyo. So tinitingnan namin yung mga presyong yun. In fact, yun. Naging source din yun ng parang new line of work ng budget tracker. Pero yun, yung direct consequence naman nun ay posibleng mapunta siya sa mga sa hindi ka nais-nais na mga purposes. So naniniwala kami na dapat yung pera from the public purse ay dapat for public purpose. Diba? Otherwise, possibly magkakaroon ng fraud o ng corruption. At ayaw natin yun. So kailangan maramdaman ng people in charge that the citizens are watching. Diba? The people who elected you there, the people you swore to serve, are looking at the contracts that you're signing. So yun po. Sorry, ang haba-haba na sagot ko. Pero Ate Ian and Michael.
Parang yun nga parang we understand the sentiment ng public kung diba, if you look at the publicly available information, it's really difficult to get a complete picture of the financing landscape and determining how sources of financing and disbursements fit together. So for example, yung sinabi mo na we can DSWD na SAP monitoring dashboard for emergency subsidy, yung nirelease ng DSWD na you can track the per region breakdown ng number ng 4Ps, ng non-4Ps families. Pero kung ibabangga mo yung details dun sa DSWD monitoring dashboard sa President's report, hindi siya nagmamatch. Same din siya with the DOH COVID-19 tracker. There has been a lot of issues regarding sa the way they track the nationwide cases data kasi hindi siya nagmamatch dun sa mga regional data. Kaya in our second report, we actually recommended na there should be a comprehensive auditing, accountability, and reporting mechanisms to monitor the disbursement process and verify appropriate receipt. We recognize also na there should be full tracking and accountability ng Bayanihan budget. That's why we are doing this. Better information is actually necessary for the government to smartly allocate resources, avoid duplication, tulad ng nangyari sa SAP, sa social amelioration na may duplication, and draw attention to critical gaps and ensure accountability sa mga department. Tulad yung sabi ni Ken, gusto namin malaman ng government na meron talagang tumitingin, may nagbabantay dun sa budget natin.
Yeah, I agree with what Ken and Michael said, na and going back to the impact if hindi tayo transparent, siguro just a brief situation or on our transparency efforts. We were also able to dialogue with our DBM public officials with ASEC Rolly, no? And I think if you follow, no, doon sa pagdidilig natin na analogy, yung budgeting process, napaka-transparent na po nun. And we're grateful to have that transparency because sa budget na transparency na side, edi pwede nating tingnan kung magkano ba yung ina-allocate for the different programs. And that's where we can provide feedback na ito po yung line item na to kulang, which we found, like for example, dun sa SF, yung Dole camp, hindi sapat yon kasi magkano lang yung inallocate nila. That's why nagkaroon ng DOF SSS na subsidies for 51 billion yon. Nilagyan nila ng pera doon. So yung mga ganong usapin, like you can see there from the budget, if you think that, oh, this is under budgeted, then we can give feedback there. So in a way, we're kind of, and in fact, our laws allow for public participation. Up to the LGU level, yung Municipality Development Council, there is really a space, mandated by law yun, na dapat may input doon yung civil society organizations. Kaso parang, no, it's been fascinating for me personally, to study our laws in this time kasi hindi naman ito tinuturo sa school, pero parang ang ganda pala ng disenyo ng mga institutions natin, pero siguro hindi na educate tsaka hindi din parang wala namang course on responsible citizenship. Pero if you look at even like the opportunities for participation, doon po sa municipal level, we really have space to do it. Hindi lang natin i-take advantage. And so that's a big lesson for me as well. And even for the educators here, that maybe we should consider educating our youth on what it means to be a good citizen and legitimate avenues for participation in our government processes. And so that's on the budget side. Dito tayo nagkakatalo ngayon sa execution. Dito tayo bulag. And I think this is where it's most critical. Kasi even the institutions that we have, COA is already after the fact. And although COA has participation in approving some of these things, if no one is looking at the data pa rin, independently, gaya ng ginagawa tuwing eleksyon, yung NAMFREL, tinitingnan natin yung mga boto real-time. Walang real-time audit na nagaganap sa spending. Di after the fact na natin makikita yung kung meron mang inefficiencies, kung merong fraud, doon sa process na yon. So, tas ano gagawin? Paano pa natin kukunin yung pera? And thirdly, doon sa execution, and even when there are findings, we're also seeing that even when we find irregularities, it takes so long to actually rectify the situation. And even then, there's impunity in this process. And we're seeing that all the time. So kaya mahalaga na for us as citizens to really advocate for more transparency sa execution pa lang because we don't have confidence in the rectification process. So yun yung mga pwede natin gawin. And the impact of that really, for me, apart from, of course, funds not reaching those who need it, is confidence in our institutions. And if people don't have confidence in the plans of our government, doon tayo nagkakaroon ng negative externalities. Kaya yung mga tao hindi sumusunod sa mga alituntunin kasi bakit ako magsistay at home, magugutom ako, baka hindi ako marating ng ayuda, so lalabas ako. So magsispread yung virus. Kasi hindi sila confident na pag nagstay sila sa bahay, matutulungan sila. Alam mo yun? So parang it's confidence helps manage negative behaviors of people that can happen because they don't understand what's going on and because they're not confident that help will reach them. So transparency helps with that. And even for us in civil society, if we have more transparency on this, then it's easier for us to chip in na hindi na gulo-gulo buhay na, alam mo yun, parang kung saan-saan lang tayo, parang shotgun approach in helping because we don't know where the real gaps are. And if there's more transparency there, then we can be more systematic and targeted in helping and partnering with government.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's proceed in the next question. So we have quite a number of students attending in today's session, and I think your answers to this question will definitely benefit them. Now, this is the question. What is your advice for Filipino students in regard with what they can do of a probable misplaced budget?
Mahalaga for students to first of all study. To study what the budget process looks like. Kasi whatever you think about the budget process currently, parang in abstract, you'll find that as soon as mag-drill down kasi information, mag-iiba talaga yung perspective mo about how the budget process goes. And mahalaga to figure out, for example, na what does it really mean for budget to be displaced? Diba? Kasi even up to now, we cannot para siyang it's an analogous question to what does it mean to change the system. And if you say that the system, kung bulok yung sistema, di ba? Parang hindi ka pwede mag-stop lang doon sa parang big glamorous idea that I will change the system. It's very important for you to go very deep, di ba? And citizenship means it's not parang what engaged citizenship means is more often than not a big glamorous idea, but boring everyday acts of studying. Na pupunta ka sa meeting, makikipag-converse ka with with your local government, kakausapin mo sila, not with an accusatory tone, but with first siguro with an intention to ask questions and to clarify, and to just generally keep checking whether your current understanding of the situation is correct. So, doon din siguro nagkakaroon ng konting tension kasi some government officials feel na talagang they're being misrepresented. So, parang a third-party civil society organization or even a student organization can basically say, we've confirmed that XYZ budget may be risky. And if you take note, kahit dun sa procurement information na chine-check namin na 4 billion, we cannot conclude na fraud yun. Di ba? Parang hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na yung isang kontrata ay fraud because there are specific agencies that are actually in charge of that. Di ba? Parang even in your communication, kailangan precise ka rin sa ginagamit mong terms. So for example, ang gagamitin mong term ay red flag kasi you can't conclude it's fraud, but you can say that it's probably a risky transaction and therefore COA should do the audit. Or our senators and House representatives should probably ask for an investigation in aid of legislation. Di ba? Parang mga ganun yung mga tatanungin mo. So you para alam mo rin kung saan ka lulugar. Halimbawa sa another example of possibly displaced budgets will be to check if tama ba yung mga pangalan na nasa ayuda. Kung hindi, tatanungin mo yung DSWD, bakit mo kaya nakakuha itong name na to? Kaya mahalaga na pinapublish yung mga names and one of our efforts is to come up with an easily searchable list kasi medyo mabagal mag-load yung sa DSWD site. So gumagawa kami ng parang mirror site where people can more quickly access the information. Hindi mo kailangang maghintay ng maraming minuto para mag-load.
Public. So for students who want to help, I think tama si Ken, educate yourselves. Not all Filipinos get to have the privilege of having a college education, and it's a precious time. Take advantage of the opportunity to even be given the space to learn. So take all opportunities to understand the budget process, but also to understand our country and what's going on, especially with all of these confusing things. So parang even now, parang nung lumabas yung anti-terror bill, I had to read again like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. We're so lucky that you have all of this information at your fingertips. Like the official Gazette website is so full of information. DBM has a lot of information opening Ken spent a lot of time making operations manuals for Department of Finance. Some portions of that is probably published. And so just try to understand how, these institutions work and educate yourselves. Para kung may gusto kang ilahad, then you can, how that works and you have a systems appreciation for how to intervene. Hindi lang yung one-shot approach, but it's a very systems thinking. And I think more actionable for you at this point is to really get involved in matters in your local government. I think yun. We're so caught up in like national affairs, but really where the action happens and where meaningful impact to the individual level nangyayari siya sa LGU. So ngayon, and as I mentioned earlier, there are spaces for participation. So be parang hold your barangay captain accountable. Kausapin niyo siya. First of all, do you know who your barangay Second of all, like, do you know who your counselor is? Yung mga ganon, because they are the ones who can really like make changes in your immediate community, even sa family mo. So engage with them, dialogue with them, try to understand what's going on and help there. And more importantly, be very, I think now, akala natin, I guess pre-COVID, parang we were thinking that maybe voting at an LGU level is not as important as voting for like our senators or like our president and vice president. But again, as you see, in a situation like this, nasa buhay ng barangay, ang buhay mo ay nasa kamay ng barangay captain mo. Kung magaling siyang mamahala at nakikipag-coordinate, it can really spell a difference for people in your community. So educate yourself, educate the people that you know, with kindness, and I guess learn the art of respectful discourse. Like respectfully talking to. I think that's a skill that we are learning the hard way as Filipinos right now, and I think we will continue to learn this as humans. Just how to talk to each other with empathy and respect, no?
All right, so moving on to the next question. If they borrow so much, why does there is still no mass testing?
Well, I can answer this. Yeah, like first stab. Yes, so we'll also send you a link. I think yesterday we published an article in partnership with ANCX, analyzing all of our loans. So what we did was we looked at all of the loan terms and tried to study them, and we tried to answer 3 questions. So first question is, do we have the capacity to pay off the debt? So yun yung unang tinanong namin. And really, like the Philippines is able, before we panic and get angry, the reality is our economy is able to really pay off, and we're in good standing. We have enough reserves, we have enough fiscal space, as you call it, to really accommodate these loans that are coming in. And I'll link you to this article as well. It discusses the details of what that means. So we can pay it off. Kaya po ng gobyerno natin na bayaran yun. In fact, in this crisis, it's important to really like get more resources and make cash available so that we can respond quickly. And I think our Department of Finance is doing that well. Second is, what are the loan terms? I think dito tayo kinakabahan lahat, kasi baka mamaya 500 million years yung interest, napakataas. So when we looked at the interest rates of all of these loans that we're taking, they're fairly reasonable. We are privileged that in this decade, we have experienced good credit ratings from international, credit rating giving bodies, and so we are given very reasonable rates of interest. May mga varying degrees lang of upfront costs, but in general, number one, mababayaran natin siya. In fact, we have 7 times the capacity to pay off like maturing debt for the year. Yun yung pera natin ayon sa BSP. We can pay 7 times of what we need to pay in this year. And the third question is, where are we going to spend it? So if you look at the loan terms, may mga all of them, halos lahat sa kanila are restricted loans. Ibig sabihin, you can only spend it for certain programs that are related to COVID-19. I can't speak to may mga iba pang bilateral loans na hindi published. Yun, hindi namin alam kung restricted or unrestricted. But in general, most of the loans that we've taken are specifically earmarked for spending in COVID-19 response. So yun yung mga circumstances surrounding these loans that we're taking. But I guess the next question is, how well are we spending this? And that's the most important question. Gaano kabilis ba tayong nagdidilig? Dinidiligan ba ang tamang programa sa ating hardin? Ang mga bulaklak ba ay maayos na sumisibol at tumutubo? And based on the outputs and the outcomes that we're trying to see, and this is also something we're figuring out. We also don't know why our situation right now is what it is, and we need more data. We need more information to correlate the resources that we're pouring into health programs to be able to effectively flatten the curve. And while we are not studying the epidemiological side of it, we do want to understand, right? Like, how are we spending fast enough on testing resources? What are the actual constraints? Are we spending fast enough on PPE for our frontliners? All of these things. Are we spending fast enough on infrastructure and updating like the equipment of our hospitals so that they can respond, especially yung mga local health units, mga local health workers, they are most exposed. We don't know if they're given aid fast enough. So these are some of the questions that we're asking, and unfortunately, we don't have data-based answers for you right now. We're also blinded, and it's all the more important that we get that. So that's the context from my end, and maybe I'll give Michael and Ken the chance to talk more specifically about, I guess, spending in DOH and what's going on there.
I think dagdagan ko lang din yung sinabi ni Ate Yen. Currently, our bed capacity sa ating ospital ay around 2/5 yung occupied. Pero yun nga as most flu-like viruses are transmitted, exponential siya. Diba? And when we say exponential, hindi siya parang 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10. Ano siya? 10 to the power of X. So, mabilis yung akyat niya. So, if we don't flatten the curve, so to speak, even if we're still parang medyo comfortable pa yung space for our hospitals, that can quickly change. So yun yung gusto nating maiwasan. Gusto nating maiwasan na yung mga ospital natin ay puno at may enough beds and ventilators dito. In fact, the DOH has data on some of these critical care, which they use to compute what they call the critical care utilization rate. Diba? So what does that measure? That measures kaya ba ng health system natin to tend to patients under critical illnesses? So, naghihingalo na siya, kaya ba ng mga ospital natin na gawin yun? Pero the critical care utilization rate is focused a lot on siguro yung tertiary care na curative. Napakahalaga, and dito kami blind dun sa preventive measures. 'Di ba? Kasi mahal din yung cure. Di ba sinabi na prevention is better than cure? Prevention is also cheaper than cure. So gusto namin maintindihan, especially in new COVID hotspots, sapat ba yung prevention mechanisms? And especially now na nire-relax yung ekonomiya, there is more movement in many cities. Tama naman na hindi mo naman kailangan ng lockdown sa buong Pilipinas, 'di ba? Sabi nga ng isang epidemiologist na nakausap ko the other day, outbreaks are local. So meaning, policy responses should also be local. So tama naman na merong parang may iba mas mahigpit, may iba mas maluwag yung quarantine regulations, pero mahalaga na malaman parang nasusupplyan ba yung especially yung primary care units. Doon hindi pa namin alam talaga yung sagot. And ayaw naming pumunta doon sa point na hindi na kaya ng mga hospital natin to cure. Kailangan ma-prevent. Yun yung sinasabi nilang flattening the curve.
As per the Bayanihan Act, the Office of the President is supposed to submit a comprehensive report on how the budget is being used. What do you think is lacking in the current reporting process? This is a great question. ma'am, sir. So I think one of you could answer.
The way the President's Report currently is structured, sobrang nag-improve na siya. Kung babalikan mo yung first two reports ng President's Report, sobrang wala kang makukuha. At hindi siya auditable at all. So nung nag-release kami ng first report, yung CBT na first report, we included some of our data wish list in the report. Gusto sana namin na mai-present yung for example, ito yung budget, ito yung actual spending, ito yung target output, at ito yung actual output. So siguro come for 5th and 6th reports, they were all presented, and we actually were happy na at least napakinggan yung data wish list namin sa budget tracking team.
Pero just wanted to add something to what Michael said. Hindi automatic na kapag nagsulat ka ng report, pakikinggan ka. So I think one thing that our team was, I think, quite proactive about was asking people who are in charge of actually requesting this information formally. Meaning part talaga of their job is figuring out how the budget is spent. Sino ba yun? They are our friends in the House and the Senate. So we sent a report to allied congressmen and senators. No matter what the party was, hindi kami nagdi-discriminate ng party. Kasi naniniwala kami na parang the transparency is like crosses party lines. Yun. Tapos thankfully merong improvements, pero again hindi yun automatic. So parang hindi porket nagsulat ka ng essay o ng op-ed or na-publish siya somewhere, mababasa na yan yung kung sino yung kailangan talagang magbasa. So mahalaga in figuring out how to change the system, including the system of reporting, is sino ba yung talagang dapat makabasa ng report. So the second thing I wanted to share was, yun nga, nasabi ni Ate Yan kanina na part of what we're lobbying for, hopefully hindi siya ma-erase, pero meron kaming specific recommendations doon na talagang kinopy nila almost word for word yung budget data request namin. Na there's this set of tables kasi called the budget of expenditures and sources of financing that's always presented in every budget process. Meaning may 4 trillion pesos na budget yung Pilipinas. Yung 4 trillion pesos na yun, kailangan mong malaman, what are your expenditures, ano yung buckets, tapos ano yung sources of financing, ano yung tubig. Meron ng existing format na ganun. Tapos gusto namin, kung i-extend man yung Bayanihan 2, masama yung table na yun na comprehensive. Kasi ngayon parang, ang dami-dami pa namin kinukunan na data sets from all other government agencies, which we're glad to do, but at the same time, parang, if you ask us what's the best use of our time at this point, mahalaga yung weekly reporting, pero mas para sa amin, where we can really add value is yung parang individual, parang papasok talaga kami doon sa budget line item, tapos titingnan talaga namin na yung pinaka-specific na pwedeng documents na makuha namin, at yun yung i-report namin sa public. So yun yung parang parang talaban ng mga team members namin. So at the end with education, PR, comms, Michael with audit and accounting genius. Tapos ako taga-kulit ng mga kaibigan from government. So yun yung naging parang roles namin. And that's how it evolved over the past 3 months that we worked together.
And I think lastly on reporting, I feel like my personal frustration, speaking candidly, is in any crisis communication strategy, the question that people will always ask is, what will happen to me? And so the reporting of the president should answer that question. What will happen to our people who are most affected? Kasi yun eh, kapag nasa crisis, tatanungin ng tao, anong mangyayari sa akin? Kapag nasagot mo yun, kakalma yung tao. In general, reasonably speaking. Kakalma yan sila if you have clear timelines, if they know exactly what to do, if it's clear, and if they know what's going on, and they know what's going to happen to them, typically they will respond well. And so I think that is, apart from the specifics of what should be reported, the goal of why we report these things would really be to present to the people what's going on and what will happen to them in light of all the actions that the government is taking. So it shouldn't just be a laundry list of accomplishments, ano nagawa, anong hindi. Pero anong mangyayari ngayon? Anong mangyayari sa mga tao? Anong gagawin namin sa sarili namin? Sa gitna ng crisis na to, and we're finding that that's not answered as effectively as we'd like.
Thank you very much to our dear speakers. May acknowledge the presence of our director, Director Selmer Santos of the Alumni Relations Office. Hi, sir.
Yeah.
I think Sir Selmer has a follow-up question.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ken, Yen, and John. No? You mentioned about the line item. The alumni office, together with different volunteer groups, no, been trying to help also different hospitals in Metro Manila and nearby provinces. So we've been sending them meals, PPEs, and masks, among others, no, and with the help of alumni also and students. About March or April, the issue on PPE came up. We mentioned that the price of PPE that the government is purchasing about 366, something like that, if I remember it correctly. Before that is about 1,500. I was very surprised because we commissioned several organizations locally to do PPEs for the hospitals, and it cost us like 400 to 450 pesos only per set. So how come we are getting this PPE at a very high price? What was your finding?
But regarding to your question kung ano yung naging finding namin, as mentioned by Ken kanina, we have this group now. We are looking at the procurement data of the LGUs. And siguro, this is not a final finding, but there might be really an issue of overpricing in specifically to the medical equipments. But as mentioned then by our partners, that we really have to check. So the government is following certain master price lists from, for example, from the site of PBM, the procurement service. There's also the GPPB site na master price list which they are basing their pricing. So currently we are still in the process of audit, monitoring and checking the procurement data, and we have no conclusions yet.
I-add ko lang po siguro sa sinabi ni Michael. So ang approach po namin sa claims of overpricing ay parang, di ba, the justice system is based on the principle that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. So the burden of proof now rests on siguro the citizens who want to show it. It should prove na there's some degree of there's some degree of risk doon sa presyo. So itatry namin i-strike out yung lahat ng possibilities na kung bakit mataas talaga yung presyo. Ano ba ito? Parang we interrogate para siyang dahil ba ito iba yung quality ng PPE? Mas mataas ba yung quality? Reusable ba ito? Complete set ba yung binili? So until we ask all those questions and sabihin namin no dun sa lahat ng questions na yun, only then will we say red flag to. So instead of concluding na parang, so yun din po yung parang anti-panic mode namin. Kasi I think yung trap, especially in public discourse about some of these items, is minsan hindi apples to apples yung comparison. So talagang minimake sure po namin na talagang we're comparing the same things. And mahalaga for us to be able to say that, kailangan it's supported by the proper documents. If it's not supported by the proper documents, and then that's when we can say, uy, parang may issue to . And that's where we pass off the finding to our partners in government who have the legal authority to enforce such findings. Parang dumating na ba yung from the 6 million PPEs na nakita natin na target? Dumating ba sila sa actual places?
Hindi pa natin natawid.
We couldn't verify talaga kung dumating siya. Pero what's reported actually is 2 million of the 6 million PPEs were already delivered. So that's around 34%. And in the coming, they expect to another 2 million PPEs will be delivered in the coming weeks.
Okay.
Pero wala pa, no? In terms of documentary evidence, hindi pa namin na-follow yung trail. Like, ideally, dapat na-follow namin na yung, kumaga yung delivery receipt equivalent nung pag-deliver ng PPE doon sa actual beneficiary. Yun, sana may ganong transparency. Like, for example, even in social amelioration, we don't declare, kasi may nire-report silang funding na ito na disburse na sa LGU. So for us in the Citizens Budget Tracker, we don't report that as spent kung hanggang LGU pa lang yung disbursement. Yung nire-report namin as spent, yung talagang nakapunta dun sa beneficiary mismo. Yung nakarating sa palad ng mga either na credit sa bank accounts or nakasama dun sa cash distribution list. So that's how we declare something as spent. So similarly, hinahanapan pa namin ng ganong analog for like delivery ng mga PPE tsaka nitong medical supplies. Mahirap lang po talaga because it's granular and yun, like yung ideally we should have these documentary evidences available pero that's what we're trying to get for now.
In fact, in the current GPPB site po, wala pang delivery receipt na requirement. So yung part po ng tinatry naming i-lobby para sa citizens ay ngayon po kasi purchase order lang tsaka notice of award yung currently nasa GPPB site. Ngayon, to complete that trail, kailangan mo ng delivery receipt tsaka yung actual delivery evidence.
Yes.
Pero yun po yung tinatry naming i-insert din doon sa batas ng Bayanihan 2. So we're working with our allies in the Senate to try to make it a requirement for everyone who procured. Dapat meron kayong delivery receipt, and this delivery receipt should be in one online portal. So citizens movements like ours, and so many other people, students, universities, can research this data set and say, okay, ito na-deliver talaga. Tapos ma-compare mo. Madugo lang po yung proseso, pero ganun po talaga yung
Then for context, we have the most complex one, I think the most complex procurement law in the world, I would say. It takes on average 28 days from request to actual procurement for these for stuff to arrive. Kaya din sinentralize dun sa DBM yung procurement kasi sila yung may pinaka, I think mabilis na din and mas centralized na process. So yun, parang that alone, the document trail should prevent fraud. But we still have strides, more efforts to go para ma-complete talaga yung cycle nun at mas magkaroon ng confidence na nade-deliver ng maayos.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Apo. Yun po siguro, parang it's just one example of how specific we should be in asking people about parang improvements to the system. Dapat ganun po kadetalyado yung maging action item. Para rin ma-action ng mga tao who really care within the system. So, props to GPPB kasi super open po nila.
Okay, I think that's the last question. The question coming from Sir Selmer Santos. So, I know that you still have a lot of questions that you would want to ask to our speakers. But don't worry, we are going to provide an evaluation form for today's session. And there will be a section there where you could raise your questions to our speakers. So now I am sending the link of the evaluation form for our participants to accomplish. So please check your chat box now. All right. But anyway, moving on. Again, thank you very much to our dear speakers, Sir Kenneth, Miss Jalil, and of course our alumnus, Sir Michael, for sharing us their group's initiatives on how to track our government's efforts in solving the COVID-19 crisis. Your discussion for today was very useful and very informative to every one of us who attended the session. Now, for our participants, don't worry, we'll share with you the links that our speakers have provided in this session on a separate email communication. So please stay tuned. A communication will be sent to you by our team within the week. Okay, so thank you again, Sir Michael, Miss Jalil, and Sir Kenneth for today.
Thank you po. Maraming salamat. And thank you to everyone who attended.
And I know that you are still overwhelmed with our discussion, but we are inviting everyone to join us in the next installment of our webinar session entitled Coping with COVID, Preparing Your Primary PPE. So our speakers are Dr. Jose Eduardo J.E. Mamaat, the Director of FEU's University Health Services, and Dr. Eka Lorenzo, a functional medicine doctor, a heart math certified trainer at the Life Science Center BioBalance Wellness Institute. So this session will be on July 16, 2020. That's Thursday next week through Microsoft Teams. So to register, please visit the link in the poster or go to our official Facebook page, FEU Alumni Relations Office, for more details. And lastly, this is a shameless plug, but please like, follow, connect, and subscribe to our official social media sites, our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Just search in the search box. The name is FEU Alumni Relations Office.